I never thought I'd be the kind of person to fall for my straight roommate, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. The first time Jake crawled into my bed at 3 in the morning, claiming his mattress was too lumpy and this was just temporary, I should have known I was in trouble. That was 6 months ago, and he's been sleeping next to me ever since, his warm body pressed against mine in the darkness, his steady breathing the soundtrack to my sleepless nights. What started as a joke between friends has become the most beautiful torture I've ever experienced, and I'm not sure how much longer I can pretend that having him so close doesn't make my heart race every single night. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The apartment we shared was nothing special, just a cramped 2-bedroom place near campus that we'd found through a Craigslist ad that looked too good to be true. It wasn't, really, but it was affordable, and that's all that mattered when you're two college students trying to make ends meet. Jake had answered my roommate at 3 days after I'd posted it, showing up at my door with an easy smile and a firm handshake that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. He was everything I wasn't, confident where I was anxious, outgoing where I was reserved, straight where I was decidedly not. I'd known I was gay since I was 14, had come out to my parents' junior year of high school, and had spent my first year of college navigating the complex world of dating apps and campus LGBTQ groups. It wasn't that I was closeted, exactly, but I wasn't the type to announce my sexuality to every new person I met either. Jake never asked, and I never volunteered the information, content to let him assume whatever he wanted to assume about my dating life. He was a business major with dreams of starting his own company someday, the kind of guy who wore baseball caps backwards and had a different girl over every weekend. I was studying literature, spending my Friday nights curled up with Virginia Woolf or James Baldwin while Jake was out at fraternity parties. Coming home at 2 in the morning with stories about beer pong tournaments and girls whose names he could never quite remember the next day. We fell into an easy rhythm those first few months. Jake would make coffee in the morning, strong and black, filling the apartment with the rich aroma that became my alarm clock. I'd leave him notes about whose turn it was to buy groceries, and he'd text me pictures of himself at the store, holding up different brands of cereal with exaggerated, confused expressions that never failed to make me laugh. We'd watch Netflix together on the couch, arguing over what to stream, Jake always lobbying for action movies while I pushed for documentaries or foreign films. We usually compromised on comedy specials, both of us sprawled across the cushions, Jake's feet inevitably ending up in my lap. It was domestic in a way that felt dangerous, comfortable in a way that made me forget, sometimes, that this was temporary, that Jake would graduate next year and move on to whatever came next. Probably with some blonde business major who shared his dreams of corporate success and suburban houses with white picket fences. The first time I caught myself staring at him for too long, he was making scrambled eggs on a Sunday morning, wearing nothing but boxer shorts and an old t-shirt that had seen better days. The morning light streaming through our kitchen window caught the golden highlights in his brown hair, and when he turned to ask if I wanted cheese in my eggs, his smile was so genuine, so warm, that I felt something shift in my chest. A recognition I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I told myself it was just proximity, just the natural result of spending so much time with someone who was kind and funny and undeniably attractive. Jake was the kind of guy who turned heads when he walked across campus, tall and broad-shouldered with an athlete's easy confidence even though he'd quit playing baseball after high school. He had these green eyes that seemed to catch light from everywhere, and when he laughed, really laughed, his whole face would transform, becoming something so beautiful it made my chest ache. But he was straight, aggressively so, in the way that some guys are when they're secure in their masculinity but want to make sure everyone knows exactly where they stand. He'd point out attractive women when we were walking to class, would regale me with detailed stories about his weekend conquests, would ask my opinion on which shirt made him look better when he was getting ready for dates. I became his wingman by default, the friend who would vouch for his character when some girl at a party wanted to know if he was worth her time. I should have hated it, should have found excuses to be somewhere else when he brought girls home, should have put up walls to protect myself from the inevitable heartbreak of wanting someone I could never have. Instead, I found myself looking forward to our conversations, treasuring the moments when it was just the two of us, learning to read his moods and anticipate his needs in the way that good roommates do. Jake had to tell when he was stressed about school or work, a way of running his hands through his hair that left it sticking up at odd angles. He'd pace around the apartment, muttering to himself about professors who didn't understand his vision or group project partners who weren't pulling their weight. On those nights, I'd make him tea, chamomile with honey, and we'd sit at our tiny kitchen table while he worked through whatever was bothering him. He'd thank me afterwards, sometimes reaching across the table to squeeze my shoulder, his touch casual and friendly and completely devastating. The physical affection was the hardest part. Jake was a toucher, the kind of person who communicated through contact, throwing his arm around my shoulders when we walked, ruffling my hair when I said something he found amusing, falling asleep against my shoulder during long movie marathons. It was all perfectly platonic, the easy intimacy of close friends, but every casual touch felt like a small electric shock, a reminder of everything I wanted and couldn't have. I started going to the campus gym more often, partly because I needed an outlet for the nervous energy that seemed to build up whenever Jake was around, and partly because I'd noticed the way his eyes would follow other guys who were obviously in good shape. Not in a sexual way, I told myself, just the natural competitiveness that seemed to drive everything Jake did. If I was going to be his friend, his roommate, his whatever this was, I wanted to be worthy of his attention, even if that attention would never be the kind I secretly craved. The changes were subtle at first. Jake started lingering in conversations, asking more personal questions about my family, my goals, my thoughts on everything from politics to philosophy. He'd seek me out when he got home from parties, sometimes a little drunk, wanting to tell me about his night, about the people he'd met, and the conversations he'd had. Those late-night talks became precious to me. Jake sprawled across his bed with his door open, me sitting in the hallway outside his room, both of us talking in the kind of hushed tones that made everything feel intimate and secret. He started asking about my dating life, too, in a way that felt different from his previous casual inquiries. When I mentioned going out with someone I'd met through a dating app, Jake's questions became more pointed, more personal. He wanted to know what the guy was like, what we'd talked about, whether I was planning to see him again. There was something in his voice during those conversations, an edge I couldn't quite identify, that made me wonder if maybe Jake wasn't as comfortable with my sexuality as he'd always seemed. The guy from the dating app, Marcus, was perfectly nice, a graduate student in the psychology department with kind eyes and a gentle sense of humor. We went on 3 dates over the course of 2 weeks, coffee and dinner and a movie, the kind of careful courtship that felt safe and predictable. Marcus was interested in something serious, had made that clear from the beginning, and I should have been excited about the possibility of a real relationship with someone who was actually available, actually gay, actually interested in me. Instead, I found myself comparing everything Marcus did to Jake, measuring his laugh against Jake's, noticing how his hand felt different when he reached for mine across the restaurant table. When Marcus kissed me goodnight after our 3rd date, sweet and tentative and perfectly adequate, all I could think about was how different it felt from what I imagined kissing Jake would be like. How it lacked the electricity I felt every time Jake's fingers brushed against mine when we were reaching for the same thing. I stopped returning Marcus's texts after that, letting our potential relationship die a quiet death that I felt guilty about for weeks afterwards. He deserved better than someone who was hung up on his straight roommate, deserved someone who could be fully present instead of constantly distracted by impossible fantasies. Jake noticed the change in my mood, the way I'd become quieter, more withdrawn. He'd catch me staring off into space during our Netflix sessions, would ask if everything was okay when I forgot to laugh at his jokes. I'd brush off his concerns, claim I was just stressed about school, about my thesis, about the job market after graduation. He'd accept my explanations, but I could see the worry in his eyes, the way he'd watch me when he thought I wasn't looking. The night everything changed started like any other. Jake had been out with his fraternity brothers, some end-of-semester celebration that had apparently involved multiple bars and questionable decisions. I'd been in bed for an hour, reading a novel for my contemporary literature class, when I heard his key in the lock, followed by the sound of him trying to navigate our apartment in the dark. He was drunk, not falling down drunk, but loose and happy in the way that alcohol sometimes made him. I heard him bump into the coffee table, followed by a muttered curse and what sounded like him kicking off his shoes. I was debating whether to get up and make sure he made it to his room safely when my bedroom door opened, letting in a slice of light from the hallway. "Hey," Jake said, his voice softer than usual, slightly slurred around the edges. "You awake?" I set my book aside, sitting up in bed. Yeah, just reading. How was your night? He leaned against my door frame, and even in the dim light, I could see he was smiling. Good. Really good. But loud, you know? And crowded. I kept thinking about how quiet it is here, how comfortable. There was something in his voice, a vulnerability I wasn't used to hearing from him. You okay? You need some water or anything? I'm good, he said, but he didn't move from the doorway. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever get lonely? Like, really lonely, even when you're around people? The question caught me off guard, partly because of its unexpected depth, and partly because it hit so close to something I've been feeling lately. Yeah, I said quietly. Yeah, I do. Jake nodded, like that was the answer he'd been expecting. I was at this party tonight, surrounded by all these people, and I just kept thinking about coming home. About talking to you. Is that weird? My heart was beating faster now, but I tried to keep my voice steady. No, that's not weird. That's what friends do, right? They're the people you want to see at the end of a long day. Right, Jake said, but something in his expression suggested that wasn't quite what he'd meant. Friends. He stood there for another moment, and I could see him working through something in his alcohol-loosened mind. Finally, he pushed off from the doorframe and walked into my room, settling onto the edge of my bed like it was the most natural thing in the world. My mattress is really uncomfortable, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice even though I couldn't see his face clearly in the dim light. Like, seriously uncomfortable. I think there's a spring poking through or something. I knew for a fact that Jake's mattress was fine. We bought them at the same time, from the same store, and his was actually the more expensive model. But something in his tone, in the way he was sitting so close I could smell his cologne mixed with beer and night air, made me play along. That sucks, I said. You should probably get it looked at. Yeah, probably, Jake agreed. But in the meantime, do you think I could crash here? Just for tonight? I promise I don't snore. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to say no, to make some excuse about needing my space or having an early morning. Having Jake in my bed, even platonically, even as friends, felt like a line I wasn't sure I should cross. But looking at him sitting there, his hair messed up from the night out, his eyes soft and hopeful, I found myself nodding. Sure, I said, trying to sound casual. Just for tonight. Jake's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. Thanks, man. You're the best. He disappeared for a few minutes, and I could hear him in the bathroom, brushing his teeth and washing his face. When he came back, he'd changed into a pair of sleep shorts and an old t-shirt, and he slipped under my covers like he'd done it 100 times before. My bed wasn't huge, just a full size that had seemed perfectly adequate when I was sleeping alone. With Jake beside me, it felt impossibly small. Every inch of space between us charged with an electricity I was trying desperately to ignore. He settled onto his side, facing away from me, and I lay rigidly on my back, staring at the ceiling and trying to control my breathing. This is much better, Jake said sleepily. Thanks again. No problem, I managed, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Within minutes, Jake's breathing had evened out into the deep, steady rhythm of sleep. I lay awake for hours, hyper-aware of every small movement he made, every soft sound that escaped his lips. Sometime around dawn, exhaustion finally overtook my racing thoughts, and I drifted off with the scent of Jake's shampoo filling my senses and the warmth of his body just inches away from mine. When I woke up the next morning, Jake was gone, but there was a note on my nightstand written in his messy handwriting. Thanks for letting me crash. I owe you breakfast. Jay. I thought that would be the end of it. A one-time thing born of too much alcohol and a moment of vulnerability. Jake didn't mention it when he made good on his breakfast promise later that day, taking me to our favorite diner off campus and regaling me with stories from the party that had conveniently edited out the part where he'd ended up in my bed. But 3 nights later, he was back, this time stone sober, standing in my doorway with that same hopeful expression. Spring's definitely broken, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I think it's getting worse. I should have called him on it, should have pointed out that mattress springs don't deteriorate that quickly, should have offered to help him look for a replacement. Instead, I found myself lifting my covers in invitation, making room for him beside me like it was already becoming a habit. This time, Jake didn't fall asleep immediately. We lay in the darkness talking quietly about everything and nothing, our voices hushed like we were sharing secrets. He told me about his childhood, about growing up with two older sisters who had alternately tormented and protected him, about his parents' divorce when he was in high school and how it had shaped his views on relationships and commitment. "I think that's why I don't do serious dating," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw how much it hurt when things fell apart, and I just thought it was easier to keep things light, you know? No expectations, no disappointments." I wanted to tell him that not all relationships ended in disaster, that some people found ways to make love work despite the odds. But lying there in the darkness with him so close I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, I found myself understanding his perspective more than I wanted to admit. "What about you?" he asked. "Have you ever been in love? Really in love?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities I didn't dare explore. I thought about Marcus, about the handful of other guys I'd dated over the years, about the way none of them had ever made me feel the way Jake did with just a casual touch or a shared laugh. "I don't know," I said finally. "I thought I was, a few times, but looking back, I think maybe I was just in love with the idea of being in love, you know? Like I wanted it so badly that I convinced myself I felt something that wasn't really there." Jake was quiet for a long moment, and I wondered if I'd said too much, revealed more than I should have. But when he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful, considering. "Yeah," he said. "I think I know what you mean." We fell asleep facing each other that night, and I woke up to find Jake's arm draped across my waist, his face peaceful in the morning light. I lay still for as long as I dared, memorizing the way he looked when his guard was down, the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks and his lips were slightly parted in sleep. When he woke up, there was a moment of confusion in his eyes, like he was trying to remember where he was and how he'd gotten there. But then he smiled, that easy, comfortable smile that had become so familiar, and the moment passed without awkwardness. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, trying to ignore the way my heart had started racing the moment his eyes met mine. Jake stretched, his arm brushing against my chest as he moved, and I had to bite back a sharp intake of breath at the contact. If he noticed my reaction, he didn't say anything, just rolled out of bed and padded toward the bathroom, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the lingering warmth of his presence. The pattern continued for weeks. Jake would appear in my doorway, sometimes with elaborate stories about his mattress problems, sometimes with no excuse at all beyond a sheepish smile and a request to crash in my room. I never said no. Couldn't bring myself to turn him away, even though every night was a sweet torture of being so close to everything I wanted while knowing it was completely out of reach. We developed routines, unspoken rules that governed our strange new arrangement. Jake would brush his teeth first while I finished whatever I was reading or working on. I'd turn off the lights while he settled into what had become his side of the bed. We'd talk quietly in the darkness until one or both of us drifted off, our conversations ranging from mundane details about classes and work to deeper discussions about dreams and fears and the uncertain future that waited beyond graduation. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find Jake pressed against my back, his arm around my waist and his breath warm against my neck. Those moments were the hardest, when my body would respond to his closeness in ways I couldn't control, when I'd have to lie perfectly still and focus on my breathing until the moment passed and I could convince myself it didn't mean anything, that Jake was just a cuddly sleeper who didn't realize what he was doing. Other mornings, I'd wake up to find him watching me, his green eyes soft and unreadable in the early light. He'd always look away quickly when he realized I was awake, would make some joke about my hair or my tendency to talk in my sleep, deflecting any potential awkwardness with humor and casual conversation. Our friends started to notice the change in our dynamic, the way Jake and I seemed more in sync, more attuned to each other's moods and needs. When we go out to bars or parties, Jake would stay closer to me, would include me in conversations more naturally, would check in with me throughout the night to make sure I was having a good time. "You two are like an old married couple," Jake's fraternity brother Connor said one night, laughing as he watched Jake automatically hand me a napkin when I spilled beer on my shirt. "It's kind of weird how well you know each other." Jake had laughed it off, but I caught the way his eyes flicked to mine across the table, something uncertain and questioning in his expression that made my stomach flip with nervous energy. The comments became more frequent as the semester progressed. Friends would joke about how domestic we were, how we seemed to communicate without words, how we developed a kind of easy intimacy that usually took couples years to achieve. Each comment felt like a spotlight being shown on something I was trying desperately to keep hidden, and I could see Jake becoming more self-conscious about our interactions, more careful about casual touches and shared glances. I started to worry that our arrangement was becoming too obvious, that people were beginning to suspect something that wasn't really there, at least not from Jake's perspective. I considered talking to him about it, maybe suggesting that he should go back to sleeping in his own room, that we were giving people the wrong impression about our relationship. But every time I worked up the courage to bring it up, Jake would do something that made me lose my nerve. He'd reach for my hand when we were walking across campus, or he'd fall asleep with his head on my shoulder during a movie, or he'd look at me with such genuine affection that I'd convince myself I was imagining the tension, that our friendship was strong enough to weather whatever gossip might be circulating. The turning point came on a Friday night in late November. Jake had been out with some guys from his business program, a networking event that had apparently devolved into a typical college bar crawl. I'd stayed home, using the quiet evening to catch up on reading for my thesis, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Can you come get me?" The message read. "I'm at Murphy's, and I think I've had too much to drink." Murphy's was a dive bar about 15 minutes from our apartment, the kind of place that served cheap beer and didn't ask too many questions about fake IDs. I'd never known Jake to drink to the point where he couldn't get himself home, and something about the text worried me. I found him sitting alone at the bar, staring into a half-empty beer bottle with an expression I'd never seen before. He looked lost, somehow, younger than his 21 years and deeply sad in a way that made my chest tighten with concern. "Hey," I said, settling onto the stool beside him. "You okay?" Jake looked up at me, and I could see that he was drunk, but not in the happy, carefree way I was used to. This was something darker, more complicated. "I'm glad you came," he said, his words slightly slurred, but his eyes clear and focused on mine. "I was sitting here thinking about calling you, and then I realized I already had, and then you were here, and it was like magic or something." "What's going on?" I asked gently. "What happened tonight?" Jake took a long drink from his beer, then set the bottle down with exaggerated care. "You know what's funny? I went out tonight to try to meet someone. There was this girl, Sarah, from my marketing class, and she was supposed to be there with her friends. I thought maybe I'd finally ask her out, maybe try to do the whole serious relationship thing." My stomach dropped, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. "And did you? Ask her out?" "No," Jake said, shaking his head slowly. "I couldn't. I kept thinking about how I'd rather be home with you, watching Netflix and arguing about what to order for dinner. And then I realized how fucked up that was, because you're my roommate, you're my friend, and I shouldn't be thinking about you when I'm supposed to be trying to pick up some girl." The words hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I was afraid to examine too closely. Jake was drunk, I reminded myself. People said things when they were drunk that they didn't mean, revealed thoughts and feelings that were better left buried. "Jake," I started, but he held up a hand to stop me. "No, let me finish," he said. "I need to say this, and I don't know if I'll have the courage when I'm sober. I think I'm losing my mind, because I can't stop thinking about you. Not in a friend way, not in a roommate way, but in a way that scares the hell out of me because I don't know what it means." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it over the bar's music. "What are you saying?" Jake turned on his stool to face me fully, his green eyes intense despite the alcohol. "I'm saying that I look forward to sleeping in your bed more than I've ever looked forward to sleeping with anyone else. I'm saying that when you went on those dates with that guy Marcus, I wanted to punch something because the thought of you with someone else made me feel crazy. I'm saying that I think about kissing you, and I don't know what that makes me, but I can't stop." The confession hit me like a physical blow, everything I'd been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. Jake was drunk, vulnerable, possibly saying things he'd regret in the morning. But the raw honesty in his voice, the way he was looking at me like I was the only person in the world, made it impossible to dismiss his words as alcohol-induced rambling. "We should get you home," I said quietly, not trusting myself to respond to his confession while he was in this state. Jake nodded, suddenly looking exhausted. "Yeah, okay. But will you stay with me tonight? In your bed, I mean. I don't want to be alone." "Of course," I said, helping him off the stool and guiding him toward the door. "I'll stay with you." The ride home was quiet. Jake slumped against the passenger window with his eyes closed while I tried to process everything he'd said. Part of me wanted to believe that his confession was real, that the feelings I'd been harboring weren't as one-sided as I'd thought. But another part of me, the part that had been protecting my heart for months, whispered that drunk confessions were dangerous things, that people often said what they thought others wanted to hear when their inhibitions were lowered. Back at the apartment, I helped Jake get ready for bed, making sure he drank water and took some aspirin before settling him under my covers. He was already half asleep by the time I turned off the lights, but as I slipped into bed beside him, he reached for me, pulling me close with a desperation that felt different from his usual unconscious cuddling. "Don't go anywhere," he mumbled against my shoulder. "Promise me you won't go anywhere." "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered back, even though I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, whether Jake would remember his confession or pretend it had never happened. He fell asleep with his arms around me, holding me tighter than he ever had before, and I lay awake listening to his breathing and trying to prepare myself for the possibility that everything would change when morning came. I woke up alone the next morning, Jake's side of the bed already cold, and for a moment I wondered if I'd dreamed the entire previous night. But then I heard him in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and cabinets opening and closing, and I knew I had to face whatever conversation was waiting for us. Jake was standing at the counter when I emerged from my room, fully dressed despite the early hour, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked up when I entered, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the careful way he was holding himself like he was bracing for impact. "Morning," he said, his voice neutral, giving nothing away. "Morning," I replied, moving to pour myself coffee from the pot he'd made. "How are you feeling?" "Like I drank too much last night," Jake said with a rueful smile. "Thanks for coming to get me. I hope I wasn't too much trouble." There it was, the opening for us to pretend that nothing had happened, that his confession had been nothing more than alcohol-induced rambling that we could both forget about. It would be easy to take that path, to let things go back to the way they were before, to preserve our friendship and our living arrangement by ignoring the elephant in the room. But looking at Jake, seeing the way he was avoiding my eyes, the tension in his shoulders, I realized that pretending wouldn't work. What he'd said the night before had changed something fundamental between us, and trying to ignore it would only make things worse. "Do you remember what you told me last night?" I asked quietly. Jake's hand stilled on his coffee mug, and I saw him take a deep breath before meeting my eyes. "Yeah," he said. "I remember." "Did you mean it?" The question hung in the air between us, and I could see Jake struggling with his answer, weighing honesty against safety, vulnerability against the comfortable fiction we'd been living. "I don't know," he said finally. "I mean, yes, I meant it when I said it, but I don't know what it means. I don't know what I am or what I want or how to make sense of any of this." It wasn't the clear-cut answer I'd been hoping for, but it was honest, and I found myself respecting him more for his confusion than I would have for false certainty. "That's okay," I said. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now." Jake looked at me with something like relief, and I could see some of the tension leave his shoulders. "I keep thinking I should apologize," he said, "for putting you in this position, for making things weird between us. But I can't bring myself to say I'm sorry for feeling whatever this is, because it doesn't feel wrong, even though it should." "Why should it feel wrong?" "Because I'm supposed to be straight," Jake said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've always been straight. I've never looked at guys the way I look at girls, never thought about being with a man, never questioned any of that until—" "Until what?" "Until you," he said simply. "Until I started sleeping in your bed and waking up wanting to stay there forever. Until I started getting jealous when you went on dates with other people. Until I realized that the best part of my day was coming home to you." My heart was racing again, but this time it wasn't from fear or uncertainty. This time it was from hope, from the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the feelings I'd been hiding weren't as impossible as I'd thought. "So what do we do now?" I asked. Jake set down his coffee mug and turned to face me fully. "I don't know," he said. "I've never been in this situation before. I don't know the rules or the right way to handle it. All I know is that I don't want to lose you, and I don't want to keep pretending that what I'm feeling isn't real." "You're not going to lose me," I said, stepping closer to him. "Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, you're not going to lose me." Jake's eye searched my face, looking for something I hoped he could find. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "How long have you known?" "About your feelings for me, I mean." I considered lying, minimizing the depth and duration of my attraction to protect us both from the full weight of it. But Jake had been honest with me, vulnerable in a way that couldn't have been easy, and he deserved the same honesty in return. Months, I said. Almost since the beginning. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just proximity or loneliness or wishful thinking. But every time you smiled at me, every time you touched me, even casually, I felt something I'd never felt before. Why didn't you say anything? Because you're straight, I said with a sad smile. Or at least, I thought you were. Because I didn't want to ruin our friendship or make you uncomfortable in your own home. Because I figured it was better to have you as a friend than to risk losing you completely. Jake reached out then, his fingers brushing against mine where they rested on the counter. The touch was tentative, questioning, but when I didn't pull away, he took my hand properly, lacing our fingers together. I don't think I'm as straight as I thought I was, he said quietly. I don't know what that makes me, and I don't know what I want beyond knowing that I want to figure it out with you. We can figure it out together, I said. We don't have to rush into anything or put labels on it or make any big decisions right now. We can just see what happens. Jake squeezed my hand, and when he smiled, it was the first genuine, unguarded smile I'd seen from him since his confession the night before. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that a lot. We spent the rest of that weekend talking, really talking, about everything we'd been feeling and thinking over the past months. Jake told me about the confusion he'd been experiencing, the way his feelings for me had crept up on him so gradually that he'd almost convinced himself they were normal, just the natural affection between close friends. I kept telling myself that everyone felt this way about their best friend, he said as we sat on the couch, our legs tangled together in a way that felt both new and familiar. That it was normal to want to spend every moment with someone, to feel jealous when they dated other people, to think about them constantly when they weren't around. And when did you realize it wasn't normal? I asked. Jake was quiet for a moment, his fingers playing with mine where our hands rested on his knee. Remember that night about a month ago when you came home late from the library, and I was already in your bed waiting for you? I nodded. I remembered that night vividly, the way Jake had looked up at me when I'd entered my room, the soft smile that had spread across his face when he'd seen me. I realized that night that I wasn't just waiting for my roommate or my friend, Jake continued. I was waiting for you, specifically you. And the thought of anyone else coming through that door instead of you made me feel physically sick. That's when I knew something had changed, that what I was feeling wasn't just friendship. What did you do with that realization? Panicked, mostly, Jake said with a rueful laugh. I spent the next week trying to convince myself I was imagining things, that I was just confused or going through some kind of quarter-life crisis. I even went on a couple of dates with girls from my classes, thinking that would prove to myself that I was still attracted to women. And I spent both dates thinking about you, Jake admitted, wondering what you were doing, wishing I was home watching movies with you instead of sitting in some restaurant making small talk with someone I had nothing in common with. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability he was showing me, made my chest tight with emotion. I'd spent so many months convinced that my feelings were one-sided, that Jake could never see me as anything more than a friend and roommate. Hearing him describe his own confusion and realization felt like a gift I didn't deserve. I'm sorry you went through that alone, I said. I wish you'd felt like you could talk to me about it. How could I? Jake asked. I didn't even understand what I was feeling, let alone know how to explain it to someone else. And besides, I was terrified that if I said anything, you'd think I was just experimenting or going through a phase, that you'd get hurt when I figured out I was actually straight after all. And now, Jake looked at me, his green eyes serious and clear. Now I think I was wrong about what straight means. At least for me. I think maybe sexuality is more complicated than I gave it credit for, and maybe it's okay not to have all the answers right away. That night, we slept in my bed as we had so many times before, but everything felt different. Jake held me closer, more intentionally, his arms around me feeling less like unconscious comfort and more like a deliberate choice. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I found him watching me in the darkness, his expression soft and wondering. Can't sleep. I whispered. Don't want to, he whispered back. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up, and this will all have been a dream. It's not a dream, I assured him, reaching up to touch his face, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. This is real. Jake leaned into my touch, his eyes closing briefly before opening again to meet mine. Can I kiss you? He asked, his voice barely audible. My heart stopped, then started again at double speed. Are you sure? No, Jake said honestly. I'm not sure about anything right now, but I want to kiss you more than I've ever wanted anything, and I think that has to count for something. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and Jake leaned down slowly, giving me plenty of time to change my mind or pull away. When his lips finally met mine, soft and tentative and perfect, I felt something inside me click into place, like a puzzle piece I'd been searching for my entire life. The kiss was gentle, exploratory, Jake's lips moving against mine with careful curiosity. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, both of us breathing hard despite the softness of the contact. Wow, Jake breathed. That was. Yeah, I agreed, not needing him to finish the sentence to know what he meant. Can we do it again? I answered by pulling him down to me, and this time the kiss was deeper, more confident, Jake's hand tangling in my hair as we lost ourselves in the sensation of finally being able to touch each other the way we'd both been wanting to. We didn't go further that night, both of us seeming to understand instinctively that we needed to take things slow, to give Jake time to process his changing understanding of himself and what he wanted. But we kissed until we were both breathless and dizzy, until the sun started to creep through my bedroom window, and we fell asleep tangled together, Jake's lips pressed against my neck and my fingers buried in his hair. The next few weeks were a careful dance of exploration and discovery. Jake was dealing with his own internal process of understanding his sexuality, and I was trying to be patient and supportive while managing my own hopes and fears about where our relationship was heading. We didn't tell anyone what was happening between us, partly because we weren't sure how to explain it, and partly because Jake needed time to figure things out without the pressure of other people's opinions and expectations. To our friends, we probably looked the same as always, maybe a little more affectionate, a little more in sync, but nothing that would raise eyebrows or prompt uncomfortable questions. But privately, things were changing rapidly. Jake became more physically affectionate, reaching for my hand when we were alone, kissing me good night and good morning, holding me close when we slept. He started asking questions about my experiences with dating men, about how I'd known I was gay, about what it had been like to come out to my family and friends. I keep thinking I should have known sooner, he said one evening as we lay in bed together, his fingers tracing patterns on my chest. Like there should have been signs or moments of realization that I missed. Maybe there were, I said. Or maybe this is just how it happened for you. There's no right timeline for figuring out who you are. Did you always know? I thought about his question, remembering my own journey of self-discovery. Not always, I said. I had crushes on girls when I was younger, or at least I thought I did. It wasn't until high school that I realized I was just going through the motions, trying to feel something I thought I was supposed to feel. The first time I had a real crush on a guy, it was like everything suddenly made sense. What was he like? Your first crush? His name was David, I said, smiling at the memory. He was in my AP English class, really smart and funny, with these incredible blue eyes. I spent the entire semester finding excuses to talk to him, volunteering to be his partner for group projects, staying after class to discuss the reading assignments. Did anything happen between you? No, I said. He was straight, and I was too scared to say anything anyway. But having feelings for him helped me understand that what I'd been feeling for girls wasn't real attraction, just a kind of intellectual appreciation for their beauty without any actual desire behind it. Jake was quiet for a moment, processing what I'd said. I think I understand that, he said finally. I can look at a woman and recognize that she's beautiful, can even enjoy flirting with her or spending time with her. But when it comes to actually wanting to be with her, to touch her or kiss her or sleep with her, it feels like I'm going through the motions. And with me. Jake lifted his head to look at me, his green eyes serious and clear. With you, it doesn't feel like going through the motions at all. With you, it feels like the first time I've ever really wanted anything. The conversation marked another turning point in our relationship. Jake seemed more confident after that, more sure of what he was feeling and what he wanted. He started initiating physical contact more often, kissing me deeply when we were alone, letting his hands explore my body with growing curiosity and desire. I want to try more, he told me one night, his voice husky with one as we kissed on my bed, our bodies pressed close together. I want to touch you, to make you feel good. Will you show me how? The request sent heat shooting through my body, but I forced myself to pull back slightly, to make sure he was really ready for that step. Are you sure? I asked. We don't have to rush anything. I'm sure, Jake said, his eyes dark with desire. I've been thinking about it constantly, wondering what you'd feel like, what you'd sound like. I want to know all of you. That night, we crossed another line, Jake's hands and mouth exploring my body with an enthusiasm that made up for any lack of experience. He was attentive and eager, asking questions and paying attention to my responses, learning what I liked and what made me gasp and arch beneath his touch. Afterwards, as we lay tangled together, both of us breathing hard and covered in sweat, Jake traced lazy patterns on my chest with his fingertips. That was incredible, he said softly. I can't believe I waited so long to figure this out. It was worth the wait, I assured him, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. I want you to touch me too, Jake said, his voice shy but determined. Next time, I want to know what it feels like to be with you completely. Next time, I agreed, my heart full of love and desire and hope for everything that was still to come between us. As winter break approached, we had to face the reality that we'd be separated for 3 weeks, Jake going home to his family in Ohio while I stayed in town to work on my thesis. The thought of being apart felt unbearable after everything we'd discovered together, but we both knew it might be good for Jake to have some space to process his feelings without the intensity of our daily proximity. I'm going to miss you so much, Jake said the night before he left, holding me tighter than usual as we lay in bed together. I don't know how I'm going to sleep without you. It's only 3 weeks, I said, but the words felt hollow even to me. And maybe it'll be good for you to have some time to think about everything without me here influencing your feelings. Jake pulled back to look at me, his expression serious. You think I need space to figure out if this is real? I think it might be helpful, I said carefully. This has all happened pretty fast, and I want you to be sure about what you want before we go any further. I'm already sure, Jake said firmly. I love you. I'm in love with you. I know that might be scary to hear, and I know it complicates things, but it's true, and I don't need space to figure that out. The words hit me like a physical blow, everything I'd been hoping to hear but hadn't dared to expect. Jake. I love you, he repeated, his voice steady and certain. I love your laugh, and your terrible taste in movies and the way you make coffee in the morning. I love how patient you've been with me while I figured myself out. And I love how safe you make me feel. I love sleeping next to you and waking up with you and talking to you about everything and nothing. Tears were pricking at my eyes, emotion overwhelming me in the best possible way. I love you too, I whispered. I've loved you for months, even when I thought it was hopeless. Jake kissed me then, deep and passionate and full of promise, and when we broke apart, both of us were smiling through our tears. 3 weeks is going to feel like forever, he said. But then you'll come back, I said. And we'll figure out the rest together. Jake did go home for winter break, but we talked every day, long phone conversations that stretched late into the night, video calls where we'd fall asleep with our phones propped up beside our pillows so we could see each other's faces. The separation was difficult, but it also gave us both time to process everything that had happened between us, to think about what we wanted our relationship to look like going forward. Jake told me about coming out to his sisters, how they'd been surprised but supportive, how they'd told him they'd always wondered if he might be gay because he'd never seemed genuinely interested in any of the girls he'd dated. They said they could tell I was different when I talked about you, Jake said during one of our late-night calls. Apparently I get this look on my face when I mention your name, like I'm thinking about something wonderful. What did you tell them about us? The truth, Jake said. That you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and that I'm planning to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. The casual mention of the rest of our lives made my heart skip, but I tried not to read too much into it. We were still so new, still figuring out how to be together, and I didn't want to put pressure on Jake by assuming he was thinking about long-term commitment. But when he came back from winter break, tanned and relaxed and more confident than I'd ever seen him, one of the first things he did was pull me into his arms and kiss me like he'd been thinking about it for weeks. I missed you so much, he said against my lips. I never want to be away from you that long again. You don't have to be, I said. I'm not going anywhere. That semester, our final semester before graduation, felt like a honeymoon period. We were completely open with each other about our relationship, no longer hiding our affection or pretending to be just roommates. Jake came out to more of his friends, introducing me as his boyfriend with a pride that made my heart swell every time. We started making plans for after graduation, talking about moving to a new city together, finding jobs in the same area, building a life that belonged to both of us. Jake had job interviews lined up with several companies, and I was applying to graduate programs, both of us excited about the possibility of starting fresh somewhere new, somewhere that would be ours from the beginning. I keep thinking about how different things could have been, Jake said one evening as we walked across campus, his hand warm in mine. If I hadn't been brave enough to sleep in your bed that first night, if I hadn't gotten drunk and confessed my feelings, if you hadn't been patient enough to let me figure myself out. But you were brave, I said. And I was patient. And now we're here. Now we're here, Jake agreed, stopping to pull me into his arms right there in the middle of the quad, not caring who might see us. And I can't imagine being anywhere else. As graduation approached, we both got good news about our futures. Jake accepted a position with a marketing firm in Chicago, and I was accepted into a graduate program at Northwestern, both of us thrilled that we'd be able to stay together as we started the next chapter of our lives. The night before graduation, we lay in bed together in the apartment that had become the backdrop for our love story, talking about everything we'd experienced together and everything that was still to come. Do you ever regret it? Jake asked quietly. Falling in love with your straight roommate who turned out to not be so straight after all? I turned to face him, taking in his beautiful face in the dim light from the street lamp outside our window. Never, I said firmly. Not for a single second. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Even when I was being an idiot about my sexuality? Especially then, I said, making him laugh. You were trying to figure yourself out, and you let me be part of that process. Do you know how amazing that was for me? To be trusted with something so personal and important? Jake's expression grew serious. You made it safe for me to question everything I thought I knew about myself. You never pushed or pressured me, never made me feel like I had to be anything other than exactly what I was in that moment. I don't think I could have figured any of this out without you. You would have figured it out eventually, I said. Maybe with someone else, maybe in a different way, but you would have gotten there. Maybe, Jake said. But I'm glad it was with you. I'm glad you're the person I get to love, the person I get to build a life with. Me too, I whispered, kissing him softly. We graduated the next day, our families cheering from the audience as we walked across the stage to receive our diplomas. Jake's parents had flown in from Ohio, and they were warm and welcoming when Jake introduced me as his boyfriend, his mother pulling me into a hug and telling me how happy she was to finally meet the person who had made her son so happy. He talks about you constantly, she said with a smile. We feel like we already know you. My own parents were there too, having driven down from Michigan for the ceremony. They'd known about Jake for months, had been thrilled when I'd told them we were together, and they embraced him like he was already part of the family. After the ceremony, we all went to dinner together, both sets of parents getting along beautifully and sharing embarrassing stories about our childhoods. Jake held my hand under the table, his thumb tracing circles on my palm, and I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for how perfectly everything had worked out. That night, after our families had gone back to their hotels and we were alone in our apartment for one of the last times, Jake pulled me close and kissed me with all the passion and love that had been building between us for months. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his nightstand drawer and pulling out a small wrapped box. Jake, you didn't have to. Open it, he said, his eyes bright with excitement and nervousness. Inside the box was a simple silver ring, elegant and understated, exactly the kind of thing I would have chosen for myself. But it was what was engraved on the inside that made my breath catch. My heart found its home in you. It's not an engagement ring, Jake said quickly, seeing my expression. I mean, not yet. Anyway, I know we're still young and we're just starting our lives together, and I don't want to rush anything. But I wanted you to have something that showed how I feel about you, how committed I am to this, to us. I looked up at him, this beautiful man who had turned my world upside down in the best possible way, who had been brave enough to question everything he thought he knew about himself, who had chosen to build a future with me. I love it, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I love you. I love you too, Jake said, slipping the ring onto my finger. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. We made love that night with a tenderness and intensity that felt like a promise, like a commitment to everything we were building together. Afterwards, as we lay tangled in each other's arms, I traced the ring on my finger and thought about how far we'd come from that first night when Jake had crawled into my bed claiming his mattress was too lumpy. What are you thinking about? Jake asked softly. That first night, I said. When you said your mattress had a broken spring. Jake laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest where my head was resting. I can't believe you never called me on that lie. I knew it was a lie, I admitted. But I wanted you in my bed so badly that I was willing to pretend to believe any excuse you gave me. Really? Really? I would have let you sleep here every night from the very beginning if you'd asked. Why didn't you ever say anything? I lifted my head to look at him, seeing my own love reflected in his green eyes. Because I was scared. Because I thought you were straight and I didn't want to ruin what we had. Because sometimes the most beautiful things happen when you're patient enough to let them unfold naturally. Jake reached up to cup my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. I'm so glad I was brave enough to crawl into your bed that night, even if I didn't understand why I wanted to be there so badly. Me too, I said. Best broken mattress spring ever. There was never a broken spring, Jake said with a grin. I just wanted to be close to you. And that was the only excuse I could think of that wouldn't make me sound completely crazy. You could have just asked, I said. I would have said yes. I know that now, Jake said. But I'm kind of glad it happened the way it did. There's something perfect about the fact that we fell in love so gradually, so naturally, that neither of us really noticed it happening until we were already too deep to turn back. No turning back now, I agreed, settling back down against his chest. No turning back, Jake confirmed, his arms tightening around me. Just forward, together, for as long as you'll have me. Forever, I said without hesitation. I'll have you forever. As I drifted off to sleep that night, surrounded by the warmth and scent and steady heartbeat of the man I loved, I thought about how sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest lies. Jake's broken mattress spring had been fiction, but everything that had grown from that first night had been beautifully, perfectly real. We moved to Chicago 2 months later, finding a small apartment in a neighborhood full of young professionals and graduate students, starting our new life together with the same easy domesticity that had characterized our relationship from the beginning. Jake thrived in his new job, quickly earning the respect of his colleagues and supervisors, while I threw myself into my graduate studies with renewed passion and focus. Our friends from college would visit sometimes, marveling at how settled and happy we seemed, how naturally we'd transitioned from roommates to partners to something that looked remarkably like a married couple. We'd host dinner parties in our tiny kitchen, Jake cooking while I mixed drinks, both of us moving around each other with the practiced ease of people who had learned to share space and build a life together. You two are disgustingly happy, our friend Connor said during one of his visits, watching Jake automatically hand me a napkin when I spilled wine on my shirt, the same gesture that had prompted his comment about us being like an old married couple back in college. We are, Jake agreed, not even trying to hide his smile. Disgustingly, ridiculously happy. It's gross, Connor said, but he was smiling too. Also kind of amazing. I'm happy for you guys. Later that night, after Connor had gone back to his hotel, Jake and I cleaned up the kitchen together, moving in the synchronized dance we'd perfected over months of shared domestic life. Do you think we're disgustingly happy? Jake asked as he dried the dishes I was washing. Probably, I said. Does that bother you? Not even a little bit, Jake said, setting down the dish towel and pulling me into his arms, not caring that my hands were still wet and soapy. I like being disgustingly happy with you. Good, I said, standing on my tiptoes to kiss him. Because I plan on being disgustingly happy with you for a very long time. How long? Jake asked against my lips. Forever, I said, the same answer I'd given him that night after graduation. For as long as you'll have me. Forever it is, Jake agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted like wine and laughter and the kind of love that grows slowly, patiently, until it becomes the foundation for everything else.